Good morning and welcome to this edition of the Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series. My name is Andy Erickson. I'm happy to be your host for this morning session. We have a great speaker. This seminar series is really intended to bring nationally recognized experts in stormwater and green infrastructure to Minnesota to share their insights, and then put them on a panel discussion with local experts on the same topic to expand that discussion, transfer knowledge and technology, and really expand our boundaries in what we do in water resource management. This effort is funded through the Water Resources Center and the Clean Water Council. We're very thankful for them supporting this work, and we're very thankful for all of you for joining us, both in person and those that are online. We will have time for questions for both in-person and online audience. If you are online, please post your questions in the chat as the moderator has instructed. If you're in the room, we will save questions until the end of the presentation. After the presentation, we will have a panel discussion. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Jamie Houle from the University of New Hampshire Stormwater Center, where he is the program director. I've known Jamie at least since 2006. I've seen many of his presentations, all very interesting. I'm very excited to see his presentation today. And with that, I will invite Jamie up to take over. Please help me welcome Jamie.
All right, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be part of this program. I know I've been preceded by a lot of eminent researchers, and hopefully I can live up to the expectations. I'm going to talk a little bit different today about what we do, because we've been around for about a decade and a half. So for the last 15 years, we've actually done a really good job at characterizing different best management practices and their effect on hydrology and stormwater quality, to the extent that we're not getting funding for research anymore. It's transitioned into implementation. So that's a good thing and a bad thing. We still have research questions, plenty of them, but there's a lot of movement in implementation. And I'm a research associate, research faculty, so I need to bring in all my money, so I have to go where the money goes. And the money goes to implementation, and that's what we've been doing. That said, there's still research opportunities, and I think I'm gonna go through a lot of what we've been learning as we've been implementing. But I have to get rid of contractual obligations, because if you're a stormwater presenter, you need to show pictures of the Cuyahoga River and the river catching on fire. So that's my contract obligation, right? Because this started the Clean Water Act. The most interesting thing to me, looking at this from an implementation perspective, is the Cuyahoga River didn't catch on fire once. It actually caught on fire like 13 times. And so the real interesting thing for me is looking at what was the difference? What happened that 13th time in 1969 that was different, that caused legislation to happen? What was different about this event in 1969 that led to the acceptance and implementation of the Clean Water Act? And so I started to think, and I started to investigate. I'm like, maybe there were human casualties. And that's not true. There's no casualties in 1969. Some of the previous fires were more devastating with respect to infrastructure loss and human casualties. What was the difference in 1969 that somehow they didn't figure out 13 other times that rivers shouldn't catch on fire and we should do something about this? Does anybody know? Somebody knows. Yeah, in the back. Sorry, Randy. Oh. Yes. So I didn't know the other context, but the difference that I picked out was media. So this was the photo that was on Life magazine that went all across the country. And it was the first time that, I guess situationally, you had lots of people, not just local people, saying, hey, rivers shouldn't really catch on fire. And so it led to some congressional action. The instructive thing here is that there was a sequencing, there was a timing, there was something that was hard to calculate, right? There had to be the right assortment of things that led to that implementation. And so I just raised that as kind of a thought model, because I think the same thing happens as we move to non-point source as well. There's situations, there's instances where the right things coalesce to really move us forward. And now really we don't deal a lot with rivers catching on fire. We've done a relatively good job reducing point source. We were in Portsmouth, where I'm from, 2 years ago, they signed the agreement that moved them into tertiary treatment from primary treatment at the wastewater treatment facility to tertiary treatment. So I think that might be one of the last large community primary treatment wastewater facilities now moving to tertiary treatment. So we've done a really good job. Now we're at a point source issue. And in New Hampshire anyway, where I'm from and where I do much of my research, it's about 92% of our impairments are somehow related to stormwater. So this is really a driving force as far as clean water goes. The other interesting thing is we've really done a lot of work at our center. We've researched over 40 different best management practices, from LID, or green, now called green infrastructure approaches like bioretention systems, gravel wetlands. We've looked at conventional systems like ponds and swales, and we've looked at really innovative devices like permeable pavements, and we've looked at manufactured treatment devices as well. So the whole range, about 40 different BMPs, and we produce a lot of data on the effectiveness, and we feel like we have a pretty good handle on what's effective and what's not effective, what targets certain pollutants of concern, and what does a better job with others. And this presentation is not about this data. As it was my contention early on that this was going to be the end of my job, right? If I could successfully characterize the performance and put this out in reports and develop fact sheets and publications that would lead any logical actor to the conclusion that we could do better with respect to water quantity and quality control, that it would happen. And if you had talked to me 15 years ago and told me that I'd still be doing demonstration projects today, I would have said, you're nuts. We're gonna do our demonstration projects, we're gonna create the data, we're gonna demonstrate the effectiveness, and then we're gonna change the world. And that didn't really happen. That didn't really happen, despite my best efforts, and I'm the publisher of a massive amount of fact sheets, and I've grown to loathe fact sheets. Just loathe them because nobody reads them. And so I realized that there was something more. I was headed on this trajectory that either I was going to go completely cynical and say, you know, we've done all the work for you, we've shown data, we've lined this all up, and people are just fundamentally unwilling to take this next step. And I was gonna give up on people, or I was gonna take a step back and say, oh, there might be something, maybe I'm missing part of it. And so that really led me to looking at this question anyway, of what is this wall that I can't, what's this invisible wall that I keep slamming into that's stopping full-scale implementation? Why am I still doing demonstration projects 15 years in if we know what the problem is largely? We know the science informs us how to address it better. What's happening? And so I started to investigate more on the process of adoptions. How do innovations spread through populations? In this case, I'm not talking about an iPhone, I'm talking about advanced stormwater management. And really my unit of analysis is a municipality, because that's largely, I have a partial appointment with our cooperative extension. And so I do a lot of my work with municipalities. And it was at one conference, I think it was a WEF conference 2 years ago, where one of the keynote speakers introduced this, and he was from a completely unrelated field. And I think he was in some type of business or IT technology. And he talked about this Gartner hype cycle. Has anybody seen this? This actually explains how innovations mature in a market. So this is very general, and it's largely for business. And it's really a mental model of the evolution of a technology from, you know, basically something that's disruptive, that comes into a marketplace and is completely different, and how it moves through its general evolution to a actually successful, viable project. And not every technology does that, or not every innovation does that. But it was really interesting to me because I think I was successfully burrowed in the trough of disillusionment here. And, you know, we had gone through this. The interesting thing is if you talk to anybody else, Villanova, North Carolina State, Minnesota, our research is all pretty confirmatory. We're not really arguing much about what we're finding in our academic research. Andy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's amazing. And we like that from a research perspective, that we feel like we're getting a pretty good handle on it. So why are we here? And how do we get out of that trough? And so the way it goes is you have these inflated expectations. This is the hype. This is green infrastructure will save you from climate change, right? It won't. That's something that really scares me. And then we have this reaction from the market to, wow, you sold me this bill of goods, and now my buyer retention looks like a weedy hole in the ground. And, you know, what's the deal? And so somehow, if the product is going to be successful and it's going to mature over time, we've got to get to this slope of enlightenment and then plateau and productivity. And this is really what I feel like implementation gives us, because we spent a lot of time, and the title of my presentation is moving from an industry of the problem to an industry of the solution. And for the most part, we had spent a lot of time and energy modeling the heck out of this stuff, right? We optimized placement of every system. And I kind of call that an industry of the problem because we can do that all day long, and it doesn't lead to a pound of phosphorus reduction in the watershed. But we can do that all day long, and we can never get to implementation. And some of our funders really love these models, as we can, you know, show them all these ways that we can look at this problem, analyze all the implementation, and then say, you know, focus on some optimized result. But when you get in the field, everything changes. And this is what we found as we moved into implementation. We said, this is the perfect spot for that B&B, and this is what it should be. And then we ran into something. You know, anything from a 40,000 square foot historic sand filter that nobody knew where it was, to, you know, a property owner that says, not in my backyard. That's not going in my yard. And you know, we tried to convince them that all our models say your yard is perfect for this B&P, but that didn't necessarily make them want some implementation in their yard. So we know that implementation is different, and we also know that it has to be different because we learn things from implementation if we're going to get out of the trough. So this has been a useful model for me. The other thing that we started to realize is there's a difference between the problem, and you really have to identify what type of problem you're dealing with. And I had the benefit of being having a mentor. Dennis Meadows is associated with the University of New Hampshire, and I had some early affiliations with him. He, of course, is the co-author of Limits to Growth, and he is a top-notch systems analyst, systems thinking analyst. And he says, you know, before you venture into any type of solution, you need to identify what type of problem you're solving. Because basically, fundamentally, there's two types of problems. Easy problems, where the path from some condition to a desired condition is linear, and it's either linear in a positive direction or it's linear in a negative direction, and you have some type of method of evaluating your success or your failure. And it's very easy to say, well, this is wrong and this is right. But what happens when we get into difficult problems, and this kind of looks a lot like that, the Gartner hype cycle. When you have a difficult problem that doesn't follow a linear trajectory, right? That has multiple actors. Maybe you're involving human beings, because in my spreadsheet, my math doesn't talk back to me. But, you know, as we engage with human beings, things get more complicated. And so our evaluations have to be a little bit more measured, because, you know, this looks to me like a typical action that lacks, let's say, long-term operation and maintenance. And I'm going to give you an example of what that looks like. Okay, this is my venture into media. I've been told that PowerPoint presentations are enhanced with media. And so this, interestingly enough, we had our university say, your YouTube channel has for the university anyway, has the most views of anything that we have. 300,000 or so views. And it was one of our early videos. This is right after the installation of a pervious concrete lot that we had on campus. And we are demonstrating the massive infiltration capacity with 1,500 gallons. I think I did the calculation. It turned into about a 44-inch rain event, right? That approximately, that just went straight into the ground. And we're like, this is great. We're at the top of the plateau, the peak of expectations. And we're like, this is fascinating. We can measure it on the end and everything infiltrates into the ground. We don't see anything at the under drain and everything's great. And this is 1 year into it. Typically, we have 1 to 2 years of research money to look at these. So we looked at this for 2 years. It was great. Now, this was installed in probably 2011. And we're staging right this minute to replace this because it failed. And it largely failed because the poured in place pervious concrete industry have no defense against chloride attack of the alkali silica reaction. So, and then when you invite salt to surround your concrete, it degrades it at a rapid pace in about 2 years. So the third year, by the third winter, this whole surface had started to spall. And because the concrete had been eaten essentially by chloride application. And so we've got a lot of this documented in our annual reports that we release, but we've seen this pattern over time to the extent that I stopped specifying and designing porous pavement. My university probably per capita has more porous pavement than anywhere in our small little town of 8,000 people. But we see this relationship from age and then actual infiltration capacity. So we have porous pavements that are 15 years old, all the way down to stuff that we hadn't done this, but the university somehow had done that. We're no longer designing porous pavements for a university, largely because they don't maintain them. And so this is what we run into. We run into some folklore that these can't be maintained. And that competes with just not knowing how to maintain these. So stormwater, I hate to say that it's a nascent science, but it's an emerging science at least. And we're still figuring out how to maintain these things. So we have the ability to develop a BMP, design it, install it, and have no real viable, comprehensive, studied maintenance approach. And people still implement it. It's fascinating. And no other market is like that. So I love being in the stormwater world just because it's so wild like that. So anyway, we call anything less than 10 inches an hour failed. This is a log scale. So here you have surface infiltration capacity by ASTM 1701, which is the standard method. And then here you have in age. These are, our oldest porous pavement to our youngest. This is only 2 years old. And that still has some infiltration capacity, but everything else has failed over time. And that's largely due to lack of maintenance. So this story repeats itself over and over again in the stormwater world. I'm sure you all have seen bioretention systems. This is an actual design of a BMP that went in the Cape. I didn't do this. This is a landscape architect. And I'm not picking on landscape architect. I mean, this is beautiful. This is beautiful, right? Someone did a lot of work. All these are microhabitats. It's all planned out. Look at the plant list. This was $15,000 in plants. It was beautifully laid out. It was done with intention. It was done with appropriate design. I returned to this past year, and this is what it looks like. Who doesn't have the same story, right? And what we fail to embrace the pragmatic long-term operation and maintenance issues that accompany these things. In the end, you don't have a master gardener around who can take care of this. And so it turns into this. And, is this a problem? I'll talk about that a little bit. It's a problem from that expectation approach. If you were expecting a $15,000 ornate garden in 2 years, that's a complete failure. If you were expecting improved water quality and quantity control, then it's probably not a failure, right? But we got to manage these expectations, and we got to align them with the realities of operation and maintenance. So here's a study. We do have opportunities to continue study. So I want to, this is probably, we finished this last year. And for me, it's probably changed my whole approach more than any other study that I've ever done. It was a study of a street in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. I probably shouldn't have disclosed that because I am now on the record, but it says it right there in my text. In 2010, the city had actually won a sustainability award for this design. It was a part of a CSO separation, and that separation not only went into a separate storm sewer, but the first flush all went through enhanced treatment. So it went through rain gardens, it went through tree filters, really well designed, and it all terminated in a subsurface sand filter, which I thought was a fabulous idea because we know that they can work. Subsurface sand filter before it discharges into the Piscataqua River, and award-winning. We actually monitored this for a year. I'm not going to get into the design. We monitored some of the tree filter installations for a year, and we found good performance overall. So this is suspended sediment concentration, total suspended solids, total petroleum hydrocarbons, total zinc, dissolved inorganic nitrogen, total phosphorus. And here I'm just reporting a removal efficiency, which is the common metric that we use to gauge system performance. Not saying it's the best, but it's very common. And these are the common players as far as pollutants are concerned. And so this looks really good. This is in the first year of its operation. It matches up well with historic data. So I'm putting this side by side with a tree filter that we had studied for 4 years on campus. And it's lining up. Our UNH tree filter is in the yellow. The Portsmouth tree filter is in the brown. The only thing that was different was phosphorus. And I have an idea why that is. You probably already know there's a limited sorptive capacity in these high flow rate medias, and without regeneration of that sorptive capacity, your phosphorus removal goes away. Just like your Brita filter doesn't last forever. You got to replace it. That's all sorption. So that's 2 years. And this is very typical for a research project. We celebrate, we pat ourselves on the back, great, sustainability award, it's a success. Well, we were called back 8 years later, and the city wanted to know, well, how's our Green Street, how's our award-winning Green Street doing? And so it was something that interested us as well. And we set up a paired watershed study where we took an unmanaged, so this is conventional, just catch basin pipe drainage on this watershed adjacent to our Green Street watershed. And we looked at the outfall and we characterized the outfall. And this is my very sobering moment. Basically, what I show here, and I'll describe the plot. I'm sorry, this is milligrams per liter. So this is concentration, again, in a log plot. That's why we can put all these on the same, because phosphorus and nitrogen tend to be much lower concentrations in general than sediment. So that's in milligrams per liter. And we have the Green Street outfall versus the conventional outfall after 8 years of operation. And you don't have to be a scientist to see that there's no statistical difference. What this is basically telling me is that 8 years, my Green Street that was performing so well in the first year has now basically mimicked the performance of doing nothing. And what's the difference? What's the difference? Is it the system? Well, no, it's largely the operation and maintenance. And this is something, I'm going to be back here. I'm so excited, back here in 3 weeks to do the ASCE Operation and Maintenance Conference. And there's a small section of us that are realizing that you can put all the bells and whistles. You can have internal storage reservoirs. You can have enhanced media filter. You can have, reverse osmosis. If you're not maintaining it, eventually it stops. It ceases to work. So this is kind of a new realization. Hard that I'm 15 years into it and I'm just realizing this. And of course we realize this, but it's a process, and it's a human process, right? Because every BMP comes with an operation and maintenance plan. You know, the first O&M plans that I designed were 60 pages. Who reads that? Who's gonna read that? And this is going in the hands of a DPW guy who's putting up fires all day long. And so we've started to whittle that down, but we still really haven't effectively addressed this problem. So this is the beautiful sand filter right after it was installed. I mean, this is a great concept. This is what it was like when we opened the hatch, minus that I can't visualize the stench, and I can't visualize the cloud of mosquitoes that emerged the minute we opened this up. This is a cesspool, and it's completely clogged. We tried to actually maintain this, and we didn't have the right tools. This is a confined space. We vectored it out. We had no tools to scrape the 8 inches of schmuck. That's the technical term, the schmuck that's down there. And it was 8 inches. I dug far enough down that after the schmuck, I saw the beautiful sand that we had just put on right underneath. So I know it's still there, but the schmuck has basically hydraulically sealed this, and it's turned into a cesspool. This is harder to see, but this is after we drained it, and I'm climbing down. And just get a sense of, I love my work, but this was pushing me to the limits. So I started to really get into what is the process here? What is the process at work? And thankfully, I work in cooperative extension, and cooperative extension has solved this. And not too many people, even within cooperative extension, understand that they've already solved a lot of this. And it's called diffusion of innovation. It's been around for almost half a century. It was really developed as a way to promote innovations that the university was developing largely within the agricultural sector, and how to promote adoption. Because they realized early on that adoption, choosing whether to implement and use a technology, was very different than understanding or knowing about it. And this is one of the things that I still don't know that we've completely tackled. My fact sheets, it's an open vessel approach. Feel like, well, if you give them the information and it makes logical sense, you're gonna fill them up with the education and information that they need, and they're gonna make the logical decision. And that's just not the case. The science doesn't bear that out, because the decision to adopt is very different than the decision to be aware or to have been made aware. So fundamentally different processes and needs different approaches. So diffusion of innovation basically say when a disruptive technology, an innovation is introduced to a market, the market self-segregates into 5 basic categories. The innovators and early adopters who really don't need a lot of convincing. They're already by nature following the science. They're interested in the innovations, and they're ready to adapt. The early majority and the late majority are really where the bulk of the things happen. And these areas are more influenced by peer-to-peer. They're less really interested in an academic coming in and showing them data. And they're more interested in, well, did my buddy down the street lose his shirt when he decided to implement early? And there's a quote by John Sullivan, who's a 3rd generation chief of Boston Water and Sewer. And he said, we know that the early bird gets the worm, but what you don't know is the second rat gets the cheese. And it took me a while to think about that. I'm like, well, what does that mean? And I think it is a good kind of comical illustration of the mentality. There's certain risks of being early adopters. And a lot of people want to know what happened when their buddy down the street or the adjacent community decided to do it. Was it something beneficial, or did they just get the sand filter that nobody could maintain that became a mosquito habitat in 8 years? So I started to look at communities in my area, and I didn't have the amount to really segregate into 5. I know they exist, but I had to kind of consolidate it into more early majorities and late majorities, just because I had only a set of 42, an N of 42, a sample size of 42. And I was looking at communities, and early on, associated with a different project, people got sick of me just always trying to push green infrastructure. And I say push kind of strategically. I'm not a snake oil salesman, but I invest a lot of energy in trying to push this technology. And I've sometimes wonder, like, why? You know, if it's as beneficial and the data supports it, why would I have to push it? And so people just finally said, Jamie, tell us what you want. Like, what do you want us to do? Just tell us. And I realized I had never really articulated that. So we met with communities. We came up with 8 different things that we felt a complete community that was doing everything we wanted them to do with stormwater management. What we basically categorized success. And then I went back and I measured by looking at different planning notes and regulations. I put all of these 42 communities on this adoption scale. So in this case, you have basically my split between early adopters that would have any score. So it was like, if, let's say we said a complete community would have a fund that actually annually got money to implement BMPs, you know, they would get a 1 out of 1. So there are 8 categories. So this is 8 out of 8. And there was only one community that we had characterized of 42 that were doing everything that we thought we wanted. And then of all the categories, there was only 8 that were actually receiving a grade that we would consider passing. And the rest we'd consider non-adopting. And so this fits easily into that distribution, although it's highly lopsided on the late adopter. If you think about it from the adoption scale, these are early adopters, these are late adopters. And what does this do for me? It allows me to understand my audience. And it doesn't mean that we don't help these guys and we help these guys. It means that these guys are somewhat ready to act. They're somewhat interested in what I have to offer, which is the technical details and the academic details. And these guys, I know that they will come through other processes like peer-to-peer. You guys need to come in? Come on in. So my study went on, I went through lots of things, and I came up with this conceptual model of how innovative technology, stormwater technologies are adopted in a community. And this is, I'm pretty proud of this. It took a long time to develop. It's pretty intricate, and I can't really explain it all, but I'm here. This is my world. That's my world, and that's it. And so what this really communicates to me is this is what I do. This is what I have to offer. And there's all this other stuff that I really don't have any hand in and any control over that's affecting how people adopt what I have to offer. And so in some ways it's liberating. It doesn't mean that I've solved the problem. It's like, oh, that's the wall I keep hitting against. That's the wall because I'm here. This is all I'm concerned about. And there's all these other factors that go into how a municipality chooses to adopt or not that I don't have control over, but I can at least study. So I don't use that complex model because I can't comprehend that. I can't carry that with me. So I break it down in something more understandable, and we can just simplify it into 3 sections. So communities that adopt need all these three attributes are players. So you have technical. Do you have the technical staff that want to engage, that are compelled to engage, that can engage in a updated stormwater management? Are they influenceable? Do you have rapport with them? Do they trust you, or do they think you're a moonbat from the ivory tower? Those are really important questions. Social. Is there political support? I mean, you guys live in the land of 10,000 lakes. You better believe it's on your license plate. So there's got to be social support for clean water. There's got to be, right? We live in some areas that are more concerned about the tax base, and that's okay. We're not casting judgment. We're understanding the perspective of our audience and who we have influence and how we influence. And then there's a situational. And this is the real, as I said it early on, I would trade every one of my fact sheets for some type of event, right? Because I imagine the person going to work and they hit that same pothole every morning. And every morning it's like, gosh, that pothole is eating my car. And one day they arrive at the town council or the city council and they say, please, would you come and repair my road because this pothole is annoying? Well, we don't have a pothole equivalent in water quality, right? It's either like it's impaired or it's not impaired. It's beautiful and swimmable or it's on fire, don't touch it, right? So we don't have the equivalent of a pothole that engages communities. What we have are events. So Toledo, Ohio, a couple of years ago, right? Big cyanobacteria bloom. That is worth 1 billion fact sheets. Not that I want natural disasters, but we have to be able to capitalize when we see opportunity. And it's not really a question of when, it's if, it's a question of when. And are we capable of mobilizing when that opportunity happens? So I want to, gosh, I'm running out of time. Apparently I have too much. So I'm gonna cruise through this. There's all kinds of good stuff here. I wanna talk to you a little bit about Tale of Two Rain Gardens, because this is something that really also is very formative on the implementation side. This is a bioretention system. Beautiful landscaping, looks a lot like that, rain garden, the plant species that I showed you early on. The issue we had is it's not really being maintained. The DPW director, who's actually won awards for his implementation of green infrastructure, says, how do we maintain this? I actually maintained this, cut all the vegetation back. And, it was something that completely bothered him. And I'm like, well, what are you doing at that other rain garden up the road, which was grassed? And he's like, oh, we don't maintain that. I was like, yeah, but you mow it. And this is the other thing. Like, these are the subtle nuances. Someone says, I want a no maintenance system. Well, that just doesn't exist, right? Everything takes maintenance. But what they really want is something that doesn't increase the burden of their maintenance. So this DPW director said, I want a big deep sump catch basin in front of all of our systems, because we first tried to sell them with these at-grade inlets like they do in Philadelphia. And we're like, oh, it's easy. You just take a shovel and you shovel out the at-grade inlet. And he's like, get out of here. And then you plant it with beautiful plants. And he's like, we don't want any maintenance. We want deep sump catch basin and we want grass, because they can clean catch basins and they can mow. And it's come to a point where that's automated, and that doesn't increase the burden on them. They do it. They put it on the list. They have people they hire to do it. It's not a big deal. So now in Dover, I say, Bill, bioretention. He says, as long as it doesn't have any plants. I'm like, okay. But grass is okay. Yeah, grass is okay. And I didn't show the data, but we actually we studied it, because I wasn't convinced at first. And from a water quality perspective, we didn't see a difference. So the grass system had equivalent performance to a native vegetation. Now, I'm not saying it provided butterfly habitat or as much carbon sequestration, but from a water quality perspective, that was our concern. There was no equivalent performance. Because I get into this argument now, the landscape architects all hate me, because I say grass is fine. And I'm really at the point where I feel like we're so far behind with respect to management that I'll take anything. You want to build a system 1/10 of the size that it should be? I'll take it. You want to grass it instead of beautiful flowers? I'll take it if you're going to maintain it. So I really think that we need to increase our portfolio, if you will. Then we started to invent new things. And this is where it gets exciting. And this sounds a lot like out of the trough of despair and on the slope of enlightenment. Bill actually started to sit down with us and invent things. And we made sure we hit all the things. I want deep sump catch basin. And this is we call it a sectional media box filter, maybe an update to the deep sump catch basin. Has a filter component. It also has a sedimentation on the front. And these are designed to go in the municipal right of way. Because as we're implementing, we ran out of space. All our optimization models went out the door. We had issues from where we wanted to put systems and where we could put systems, and we inevitably got into the right of way. And so that's where we had to invent new systems. And so we did. And that's where I think it's really exciting. That's really the next thing for me. And I have some video, and we're at the point where I got him this, I said, oh, you can maintain this media box filter, and you can just scrape the media. And I got him asphalt loop. And he was like, get out of here. And then he came and he made this thing out of old lawnmower blades. And he had one of his guys But this is amazing, right? We're creating new operation maintenance tools. And then his operator said, no, none of that works. This is what works. And he pulled out this thing, which I don't even know how he manufactured it, but it's custom made and it's only a half blade. And he maintained that thing basically in 10 minutes. And so this is really, the exciting component. This is the slope of enlightenment because we're working with the owners and we're customizing these systems not only to work and to employ the things that we know work, but we're designing them so they can be maintained. And we're designing them with the owners so that we don't bear the sole responsibility. We share the ownership. This is not my creation. This is not my strange moonbat idea. This is ours. So it really changes the landscape. And the last thing I'll end with is this video, because this just happened. I always like presenting like new hot off the press stuff. We got approached by a company called Tritheris. They manufacture this high rate efficiency sweeper. And I showed you, we have acres of failed porous pavement that we've given up on. And they said, we want to come and demo our technology. And we're like, all right, fine. Yeah, you come. We've had porous pavements that have been failed for longer than your technology has been around. So, come on over. And so this is one of the installations. And I just want to run this video. It shows the pre-test where we just, it's going? Okay. Yeah. So I thought I could, I did edit this, so I'm not going to show you. Time of concentration here, this is completely failed, right? It's less, the infiltration rate here is about 2.8 inches an hour. And so we start the hose running at about 30 PSI, and in 3 minutes and 20 seconds, it had made the catch basin. And we designed these things. The new specification for porous pavement, get this, the ASCE spec says, design them with redundancy. And we've been doing this for a while because we design them with redundancy. Like we slope the pavement because when it completely fails, we have alternative drainage. And it's like, what are we doing? We know these are going to fail, and we're still designing them. And here's the technology. I think I have a shot of it has high rate, high pressure water under the platform here, and then it has high suction. There's the high rate water. These are designed to clean aircraft carriers. And so this is the post cleaning test, and this was just one pass. This is, this was 2010, so this is 9 years old. And so I do accelerate, same thing. We ran this for about 4 minutes, and the water had never made the catch basin. So they had effectively restored our porous pavement and restored my faith in technology. Like, we do know what we're doing. We can do this. And we had demonstrated this to UNH a while back, but we did it with grad students. And I'm making the final report right now because I'm reporting back. And it's like in 2015, we had demonstrated that we could restore the infiltration capacity, but we did it on 400 square feet with two grad students, a high pressure, low angle pressure washer, and a shop vac. And we said, it only took us 6 hours. So if we did the whole parking lot, it would only take us 175 hours. Like, no problem. At the going grad student rate, we can do it. And so now we have a better answer. And then we actually did this infiltration rate. Again, same methodology. This is pre, and this is post, and this is in the two spots we restored. The West Edge porous asphalt was our first porous asphalt ever. So this was installed. This is 2005 it was installed. And then this is the Alumni Center. But again, we have equivalent performance going from 1 inch an hour or so, which is basically nothing. The method loses more water than goes in, to upwards of 130, 140 inches an hour. So I guess where I end with this is I feel like this has some applicability for me now. And I use this as kind of the mental model with how I think about implementation. I know it's more than just the technical side. And I feel like we need to be kind of balanced and creative and not try to overemphasize, some of the technologies, but to integrate them with the owners, and particularly DPWs that are struggling with this, that for the most part, they want to do the right thing. It's not that they don't want to do the right thing. It's just that nobody's really working with them. And so we need to work collaboratively. And I really feel that in Minnesota, I mean, you guys are set. You've got the technical. You've got St. Anthony Falls Lab, right? Eminent researchers that can really tackle really confounding research problem. You have the social. You've got the land of 10,000 lakes. So people really want water quality, and the situational is just something we have to be prepared for. And obviously we don't want disaster, but we also want to be ready with how to respond in a solutions-oriented approach to when we do have issues. So with that, I think I'll end and hopefully have time for questions. And I'll stop there. So thanks for your time and thanks for the invitation.
Let's thank Jamie. So we will take a few questions. I'll start back here in the back. Please use the microphone for the online audience.
By the way, I'm Uday Singh and I work for Mississippi Watershed Management Organization. So I was just looking at your porous pavers or whatever, the parking lot. Structurally, that looks in excellent condition for 10 years.
Structurally.
Now, obviously, somebody who had a creative mind, innovation, they came up with it. Were they sucking everything while disturbing with those things?
Yes. Yeah, it's proprietary, but it used a combination high pressure water and with a suction head. And it's the same thing we use with our handheld tools. It's the same approach, but they've just upscaled it. And so that was their smaller model, fit to outfit a Bobcat, and they're working on an industrial model as well. So I'm really excited about it. The other thing we did is we looked at the solids. So from 1/10 of an acre experimental area, we pulled up 350 pounds of gross solids. And then we pulled up 450 gallons of decant. And we just measured that decant, and it had about 40 milligrams per liter of nitrogen and about 20 milligrams per liter of phosphorus, which is an amazing amount. And he's like, what do we do with this? And conventionally what we do is we just put it right back into the river. And so, I'm like, what does a high efficiency technology like this mean for not only porous pavement restoration, but what about pollution prevention, right? You saw Bill Selbig came here. This is something we're really excited about. Like 60% of the phosphorus load happens in 3 months. I mean, this is game changing. And it really changes our approach with management. And we can combine new technology with, optimization studies, and we can really fine tune our operation and maintenance.
Very good. Another question up front.
So I'm Randy Nieprash with the Minnesota City Stormwater Coalition. Your application of the diffusion of innovations is the coolest thing on wheels. The other terminology would be technology transfer.
Yep.
And as you mentioned, these are legitimate, established academic fields.
Yes.
With highly trained specialists who know how to apply the principles and techniques across multiple and varying areas of practice. So can you talk, it's great that you're doing this, but you're not one of those highly trained specialists in that academic field.
Yeah.
So can you talk a bit about getting those specialists engaged in stormwater and then scaling it up to the level that it ought to be, which is at least national?
I think I understand the question, and I completely agree. I don't think I can speak to it because I feel like I stumbled upon this. I've been trying to publish this, and the social researchers hate me because I coded my thing, but I didn't have a secondary, you need like a secondary correction on your coding, right? You need a blind coding that you can verify that you coded it in the way that someone else did. And so I feel like I'm a complete fence sitter. And then the engineers are like, this is just so soft. And, but it's not puppies and rainbows. I mean, this is real stuff. And so I feel like I'm a little bit sitting on a fence. So I would actually love to advance this and get this into the hands of qualified facilitators and actually see how this implements. Because I really feel that, because the other thing is from the technical side and the academic side, and I can speak to that because that's where I come from. This is difficult. This is really uncomfortable because you have to give up a lot of these technical details and you have to let someone explain this in very simplistic terms that are not correct. So I have to stand there and bite my tongue, and Bill's great and we do a great presentation together, but he's cut from a different cloth. But he reaches an audience that I can't even hope to reach in a way that I can't, that I've been trying to for a decade and a half. So I can only speak to the power of it. I've experienced the power. We're trying to implement this in Region 1 in different ways. And, we're engaging folks that are expert facilitators but we're struggling to get money for it. And we're struggling to get investment in these types of approaches. So that's about as far as I can take it, but I agree with everything you said.
Let's take one more question.
Hi, I'm Cliff Eichinger. I'm a manager with the Ramsey Washington Metro Watershed District. We've been doing this BMP implementation for, I think our rules passed in 2005. So it's quite a while. So I'm wondering, you talk about the slope of enlightenment and the plateau of productivity. How much of that can be influenced or required through regulation? So we aren't talking so much about acceptance. We're saying you have to do it. And we've been doing it.
So regulation is a driver, and it's a very comprehensive driver. It's in my big model, there. And I don't know if I can completely dissect the question or answer how we could regulate it. All I can say is it's probably the most effective driver, but not the most powerful driver, right? Because regulations kind of elicit a response that isn't always embraced. And so, I kind of look at it like it's the difference between you cleaning up your room and you cleaning up your room because your mom is not going to let you go out unless you do it. The result is the same, but the effect or the affect is completely different. And I really feel like heavy regulation forces something that doesn't bring along with it the co-ownership. And it makes people do things because they have to, not because they care, and they do care. And that's what I think it cuts out. I haven't met any DPW director or any DPW staff that hates the environment and just wants to pollute water. It's the exact opposite. But oftentimes, regulations kind of drive this wedge between pragmatic and something that is interpreted as or assumed to be cost prohibitive. And I feel like what I'm trying to do is I work equally with the regulators to say, look, we need flexibility because the way this is written by the lawyers is impossible to implement. And then I work with the regulated community and say, look, okay, this is real intention behind the regulation. So I find myself often caught as this interpreter. And it's not comfortable for me. But I don't know if that answers your question. I apologize if I sidestepped it, but it's something that I'm actively working on, and it's a problem. I will say, though, sorry, Andy, that not only do lawyers make a lot more than me, but I've never seen a water quality or environmental issue litigated and come back more understandable and easier to implement. If you have, I'd like to see that because it would be new in my book. So oftentimes it comes out, and that's where we get things like maximum extent practicable. A lawyer wrote that. Like, what the heck does that mean? I have no idea.
Very good. Thank you, Jamie. With that, let's thank Jamie. Welcome back to our Minnesota Stormwater Seminar Series. We are now going to move into our panel discussion with our invited speaker and our guest experts. I will introduce them individually and give them a few minutes to give their relation to this topic of linking research, decision-making, and implementation approaches. Our first panelist on the far left is Bob Fossum, who is the Director for Research and Monitoring at Capital Region Watershed District. Bob, what's your relation to this topic?
Yeah, I'm with Capital Region Watershed District. We're in St. Paul for those that aren't sure or don't know us. We build water quality projects. We permit and regulate other people building water quality projects. We issue grants for people to build water quality projects. So we have, our organization does have a commitment to monitoring and research. And we really view that as a way to squeeze the maximum amount of treatment out of every dollar that gets spent, whether that's our money or permitted entities' money. It feels important to try to do this the best way we can to get the most water quality out.
Very good. Thanks, Bob. Our next panelist is David Fairbairn, who is a research scientist at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. David, what's your relation to this topic?
I'm happy that's our relation, and maybe not the whole agency, because that would be a 25-minute answer, and we could only get through about 2% of it. But my relation in particular is as a research scientist, when we select projects or try to scope out projects that we've actually executed on our own, we don't know what's needed. So I would do surveys of, or just informal or formal surveys of people to find out sort of what the needs were. We really, and I personally want to hit value for what the community and state needs are. We're spending taxpayer dollars on this. And so even at the scoping phase, determine what our actual scope of topics might be. That's there. And then as we delve into it more and more, it's sort of this back and forth between, what have we identified in the manual or from our own interactions versus these topics that we've sort of identified. How do they line up? What's right? And who do we have that will partner with us, with these various projects? And so having not been there for 5 years now, so all these projects are just coming into sort of fruition in the reporting phase. I think that we've got it to the decision-making, need actually inform the project selection in a lot of ways. And we'll see how that gets translated into adoption. We hope that the work, and the results will be actionable, and that we can translate them into guidance and other forms of communication that will help beef up our own guidance and our sort of, I guess, things like how much phosphorus do you get out of this? Obviously, so some of that is sort of refining those conditions for Minnesota.
Very good. Thank you, David. Our next panelist is Ross Bintner, who is the Engineering Services Manager at the City of Edina. Ross, what is your relation to this topic?
I think in the water resources ecosystem here, I'm right where the rubber meets the road, trying to be a project implementer, but also a utility owner, where I'm, not just worried about the next project, but trying to put together, the staff systems and the people who are going to maintain it in the long run. Make sure that we have a good example to look back on 3 years ago when we're trying to sell the next one. So I kind of sit in that public works engineering role for a city, and always looking to this community for their support and ideas. I don't want to be that rat in the trap, and I want the one to be the one with the cheese. Willing to take a little bit of a risk, but I'll always want to be cautious about that long-term demand I'm putting on my maintenance folks.
Very good. Thanks, Ross. Well, we just had about a 40-minute relation of Jamie's relation to this topic, so I won't let him do that again. But I want to open up to a first general question for the whole panelists. So the panelists have all seen Jamie's presentation. I think we have similar struggles in Minnesota. We have fruitful soil for research. We also do a lot of implementation. So I guess how would you grade our current status in Minnesota and how we're linking research, adoption, and implementation? If it's weak, what are some of those barriers? What are those challenges? If we are pretty moderate or strong, how can we improve even better?
I can start. I think we're moderately, if it's poor, moderate, excellent, it's probably in the moderate category. I think within our sectors, we're probably better than across our sectors. I think watershed districts share information, share experiences pretty well. The cities, in parts of the Minnesota City Stormwater Coalition, do, I think, trade information. And I think that's about trust. I think city engineers want to hear from another city engineer. Watershed district staff want to hear from other watershed district staff on what they think works, what is implementable, what the communities might accept, that type of thing. I think we could do better sharing across sectors in terms of being able to get city experiences back to watershed districts and vice versa. And then the other component here of the research is the researchers themselves. And I think that's I think there's significant ground to be made there in terms of practitioners better articulating their need for research, and researchers in some fashion, I don't know what the best way is, seeking out advice or guidance on particular directions research might go. And that's, I think, how you get to translating the research into something that makes for a better product.
From my perspective, I've been on those teams with the university working next to the operators, and I think some of those those in the field learn while we go and put the inventor role right into the operation have been the most exciting. But I think about all the things that are happening between regulatory agencies, watershed district cities, and the university, and there's opportunities out there, and we're taking advantage of them all over the place. We got university capstone, where you can invite university students directly into your operations and ask them a research question. You can put together your project proposals with either university or consulting resources, and we've got sources of cash to go out and study what you want to study. It's just a matter of understanding that they're out there and availing yourself of them. The work that Extension does to train people in our erosion sediment control side, I wish there was more of a surface water system operator role out there in cities. We have those for our sanitary and water utilities, but we got to start getting those type of people really engaged in this community, so that you're right there at the operator level. The Water Resource Conference is excellent, but when I think about the standards of practice that we have and the organizations that are kind of shepherding those standards of practice, I've got American Water Works Association and American Public Works Association, and I don't have that group of really try it and share it in the stormwater sector. It feels like we're still creating that. And then on the research side, the Minnesota Cities Research Council, or Minnesota MSRC, yeah, we got Stormwater Research Council. Still new acronym to me, but I think the work that we're doing to come together as a community and really put our research questions out there together and fund them together and track their progress together, I think that's going to be an exciting area to watch in the future.
I would just add, as an outsider, I think you guys yeah. Having watershed districts is just cool. And as an outsider that we still manage water by political boundaries, I'm just fascinated by that, you've gotten there. So maybe in another decade we'll be there as well. But I mean, that already puts you pretty far ahead. And the fact that you can generate funds and implement on watershed scale is really, in my mind, it's really progressive.
That kind of leads into, I guess, I was thinking about, grade, and minors and stuff. I think I was going to say if it's on a curve, again, actually maybe it's like we're at a B+, just because we have, and it's different things we could do better or worse at, but I think overall we at least have, I think, on paper proactive approach to management. We have taxpayer, we have the sales tax, and we have watershed districts, and we have a lot of, I think, attention being paid. I think if I was thinking about current versus potential strength, initially I'd said C. But then I think after watching Jamie's presentation and the whole slope of enlightenment, maybe it's maybe it's more like a plus and minus. But I guess in terms of the links between them, I think that we have mechanisms in place. Obviously, cross sections what I was thinking about. I don't know that it's always reaching its full potential yet, but hopefully it will. I think that the communication it's dicey to figure it out, and I think it's a work in progress. Along with what Bob said about researchers and needs, I think that sometimes we just need to somehow have our heads better together in terms of municipalities, as the entity. I mentioned erosion and stormwater control or sediment control. As far as CSW stuff, we have these sort of required programs, and how do you get all the MS4s, not just on the permit like they know they are, but having that communication, because we have communication with a lot of MS4s and watershed districts, but there's a lot that probably aren't at the table all the time. And how do we kind of get the whole slate of needs together and whittle that down and determine what's useful and get things with maintenance more elaborate instead of just saying you have to maintain it. Like we do have that, and we have some recommended techniques for that, but I think we need to say, well, yeah, what's the rate? This is the rate, or you can build one like this, and I guess the other thing I would say is, like, from a state standpoint, I think outreach goes both ways, for sure. And so we have these outreach, mechanisms and outreach programs, but at the same time, you have to be reaching out with your ear to get that feedback, and so I just always think there's going to be better for that. I don't know if there's a formulary for it. If somebody has one, I think we should figure it out and tout it to the world, but maybe that's a little bit more of it. So, and then things just like researchers, I think, and people understanding what kind of regulatory limitations we have too. You want to know what the need of the science is, but you also have to have that in context with what kind of latitude does the regulating authority have, or what can be implemented right now as accredited versus what is just basically going to be like ground truthing things, and eventually, hopefully, we'll get it adopted as accredited, because we can't just obviously change a policy every time a new study comes out that says there's a slightly different number for this. With that ball of wax.
Great, thank you. We're going to start asking some questions from the audience. I know we already have one queued up from the online audience. So if we can take that one now, and then we'll come back to the in-person audience.
Okay, we have a question from Bill Selbick, and he says, as a fellow researcher, it's frustrating to hear apprehension to implement green infrastructure practices is largely due to uncertainty in performance. How can those who study performance of GI improve messaging?
I would say the perception is that there's uncertainty around the performance. I think the answer to the question is it's building that trust with the folks that you're trying to implement with. And I don't think that there's a shortcut to that. I really feel like we have to roll up our sleeves and we have to spend time. And in Dover, where we were working, where I think we had this breakthrough, it didn't happen overnight. I mean, and I learned that you don't get into a big debate with someone that has power equipment, because you don't win. If you argue about a slope, the person that has the big heavy equipment is going to win in the end, even if they, even if you think you won in the beginning. But I kind of humorously say that, but there's a benefit to working that out, because from our perspective is by listening and being more receptive to the owner, I guess, we were able to address all of their uncertainties with what I think is relatively minor adaptations to the green infrastructure. So, if it's inlet structure and you want a different inlet structure, we can do that. I'd never came across an instance where we couldn't modify what we did to solve what their perception of the problem was. And I would say their perception wasn't in performance. It was more like, well, I just don't like that. And so, and I don't want to undersell the value of it, but there is a benefit too to just having them at the table and including them as part of the design. And I think that's the real power of green infrastructure. We're not moving water uphill or up gradient. It's very relatively easy stuff that you can engage non-engineers with as well.
I think from my perspective, I don't know that performance or lack of confidence in performance of green infrastructure is the biggest hurdle anymore. In the recent years, it's operation and maintenance. And that's what's giving municipalities pause, that they don't debate or don't have long debates about the performance of infrastructure. I think that's fairly well accepted in Minnesota at least. But they're good at, public works departments are good at conventional maintenance and operation. And we're at, green infrastructure, you're asking them to do stuff. Budgets are tight. There's uncertainty. So I think to the degree we can simplify and standardize maintenance for green infrastructure would be very beneficial in getting more acceptance. And there has been some recent research on operation and maintenance and how that can improve. But I'm actually seeing that as the biggest hurdle right now versus not being convinced that it will actually perform as
I wanted to add too something I've heard very recently related to research and performance and uncertainty is exactly what the question was addressing is messaging, terminology. You know, when you say the word uncertainty to a scientist, it's like we understand exactly what that means. There's variability, and you know we can't say that it's this number exactly. But for others, it might mean we really don't know what we're talking about, right? So tailoring that message to the audience can be very important. I think that can overcome some of those hurdles. And we as scientists, you know, we struggle with that sometimes, so we need help. I don't know if you have any other things you want to add to that.
Well, go right to someone's front door and start telling them what you're going to do on, you know, building a project. And even engineers have trouble, you know, describing and you know, working, you know, the message through. So I think that, you know, argues for a team approach, you know, just like in research where we want to make sure we have our chemists and biologists and limnologists and everyone else thinking about the same problem. You know, it's not just, you know, the practitioner there. We got to be able to share that language with the public because it's what they demand and what they value. That's really the pull driver that makes my work fun and engaging, rather than if I'm working for regulatory purposes, soul sucking. So, you know, I want to be working on the fun side of the equation where people are demanding what I want, what I'm producing, rather than, you know, I have to do it. And I'm just going to bury it under a parking lot.
Let's take another question from the audience.
I have lots of questions. My name is Dwayne Mindot, and it has to do with Bob and probably Ross in particular. And I'm not going to let Jamie off the hook. And one of the issues that I see is that from a DOT perspective, whether it's maintenance or contractors, a piece of equipment is only worth having if I can run it 24/7. So if I got a specialized vacuum cleaner for pavement and I use it once a year, or only specify it once a year as a contractor, you know, privatizing, that's still not going to make money. So the question to Bob is, one of the deficiencies of what I'm going to call equipment implementation program. Has Watershed District ever thought about owning the equipment that you rent out? So if I want something vacuumed or sucked or disposed of, how do you actually do it when I'm not having enough people to do it every day of the year where I could actually program people, hours, and costs? And then Ross, if you were on the other side of the world, would you rent something like that if the Watershed District made it available? And the big social hurdle, because I think your graph is wrong, it should look sort of like a peace symbol. The technical side now is a thin sliver and almost everything is social. And the red part gets big when there's a red part. Otherwise, it's a really even smaller sliver than the technological side. But the biggest problem, if we actually maintain something, and this now goes back to my MPCA rep, what do I do with it? So now I just heard Jamie say, well, we'll just dump it on the inslope and it goes back into the river. He didn't quite say it.
I didn't advocate for that. I'm just saying that's what happens.
Yeah. We have certainly considered and picked on the idea of a maintenance cooperative where all owners of BMPs within our jurisdiction could contribute funding to a pool that then would be utilized throughout the district to maintain BMPs. And the economy of scale would help, and the specialty maintenance that entities like DOT or Ramsey County is just not set up to do. I think when it comes to BMP design, as we all know and realize, there's no silver bullet. And I think if we could take some of our existing BMPs and do research and evaluation on how can they be maintained with current equipment, or can the design be adjusted so we're, instead of maximizing performance above anything else, can we optimize operation and maintenance efficiency with performance? And I think when we design BMPs, we're so focused on performance, how much phosphorus can we get out. But if you look at a 30-year cost benefit, it's not just the amount of phosphorus you're getting for the construction cost. The amount of phosphorus for the construction cost and the operation. So I think we can work together and maintain things, but I think we also can build BMPs that are easier and cheaper.
Dwayne Mindot and I think are a little bit of a like mind on this one, and I feel like I'm playing slow pitch softball here. So if I get up on my soapbox too much, I'm going to watch my Watershed and PCA friends here, and when I see them squirm, I'll stop talking. So, as an owner, you know, you're under, you know, some constraints, and you've got some pushes and pulls in your organization that I don't think a lot of times our watershed district or regulator friends understand. So the more that they own and maintain things of their own, we find a lot of common cause. When we were in our street sweeping study, you know, I was pitching, man, wouldn't it be great if the watershed district just owned this stuff? Because I only need to sweep for other reasons twice a year, but man, they could just go to town with these sweepers, and it would be, you know, for their reasons, you know, very productive. I like the idea of, you know, sharing equipment where we can, but you know, that when you're that first one and you're inventing the tool, you know, you don't have a lot of, you know, that ecosystem isn't there to support you on the maintenance side, and the efficiency of that maintenance is not what it could be if we were at that, you know, point in the implementation curve where it's just a contract and everyone's bidding to do it. I've often thought that, you know, more, you know, the more networking we do, the more we're talking to one another, we're sharing experiences, and we're getting on the problem. But if we could just, you know, invite them into our organization, I would, you know, like the military, when they're getting into the war, they're like, let's get those journalists like right in our units, embed them in there. You know, I want the watershed district to send me someone, you know, and I'm going to use them for 6 months, and they're going to go back to the watershed with their head spinning, and they'll be like, guys, we can't do it this way anymore because it's worthless. Or the same thing with the PCA, you know, just put them right in our organization. I'm willing to have you right there while we're doing it, so that you can kind of feel the pain and see what we go through, so that, you know, together we can come up with something better.
It's an area too, for me, that it's one of the most fascinating areas of like blind spots. And I think there's a lot of blind spots, and I'd put this in one of them, because some of our modeling shows that when we add up all these credits for BMPs, we realize quickly we run out of land. Like, we can't structurally BMP our way out of the problem. And then you say, well, either the regulation is ridiculous and you don't know what you're talking about, which I don't advocate, or we got to really rethink the credits. And that's kind of where I am. Like, well, let's rethink the operation and maintenance. Can we do it better? What about decant facilities? Because if we're putting it all back, then what are we doing? And can we do it better? And it's such a low-hanging fruit. because municipalities are already doing it. So, you know, what are our current operation capacities and can we do it better? And, you know, that's really, it's kind of like those blind spots that keep me working. And that's what I'm thinking now is like, what about do you have decant facilities here? Do you have facilities where you, like regional facility where you could go and discharge the decant? Or what do you do with solids disposal?
Sanitary sewer system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and do the wastewater operators like that idea? No. Yeah. So that's exciting to me, but again, we need to follow up with the science and the crediting to demonstrate the improved removal in order to incentivize that type of activity.
From the MPCA standpoint, not to being general would be difficult, but that specific example of the he can't, where does it go? He can't, but you know, maybe we just have some evaporation facilities or some installation facilities and figure out who needs some more phosphorus and nitrogen, you know, to be packaged and sent to them. The moon. Richard.
So at those levels of nitrogen and phosphorus, if it's not at 20 or 40,000, you know, microsiemens,
why don't you consider using it as it is intended as a fertilizer? I mean, put it back on the landscape where it came from before it was conveyed in a, you know, higher rate off of impervious structures, and put it back to use if possible, back in soils. And that's a pretty common use model for other kinds of decants or materials that come out of, you know, less than savory locations, and we do land application all the time. So it's just a thought. And I think that example, and it could be completely unrealistic for technical reasons, but that's an example of getting the group of people in the room to talk through a solution, as opposed to just a contractor doing a task with a piece of equipment that was designed to do a specific task and not thinking through source, fate, location in a watershed or landscape context. And that's Richard Kiesling from the USGS.
I've got a reaction to that. And I think the prior two questions and that reaction really go to the issue of scale. And I think, you know, that's where we know we have to be. You design one project and you realize when you look at the cost over the benefit, you get, you know, that cost benefit number. You get a feel for, you know, what people are thinking about it, what they value about what you just produced or what you built. And then you start to think, okay, well, if I multiply that over all the benefit I know I need, I add up to billions of dollars just for my city. So I don't have a technology that can scale. And, you know, when we start to, you know, overlap our, you know, areas of responsibility or our you know, technical ecosystems, you can start to see opportunities where, you know, we did this with iron sand filters and street sweeping, and we've done them with, you know, some other, you know, source controls, where you start to see, all right, I'm starting to get into the point of cost benefit on one of these technologies where, you know, running up that height curve, I can actually multiply this technology out over my entire watershed, and still, you know, I could potentially sell that with a straight face to a board without them saying, how many $1 billion? You know, so I think, you know, that's, you know, getting more people on that equation and, you know, understanding, you know, that sometimes we're just talking capital costs and not that long-term operation, you know, getting those operators in the room so that they know what they're going to be taking ownership of and what they're going to have to, you know, which valves they're going to have to turn, you know, what muck they're going to have to scrape, so that we're comfortable going in that we have something that's reproducible at scale.
One last thing, the second PCA thing, excuse me. When you started talking about sharing maintenance costs and equipment, one of the first things that I thought of was, well, what about a state purchasing contract that everybody could jump onto? Because that would be pretty cool, right? You know, maybe it'd still be contractor rates, but I'm not sure how much, you know, that could probably render some efficiency and some ability to buy in without having to buy in all the time. But even a cooperative purchasing venture, again, I'm not an accountant, I try to play one on TV, but you know, there could be some sort of thing like that where that would reduce the maybe the need for one entity to purchases equipment and then kind of shop it out, but is there a way to combine purchasing power with the particular provider and would that save money in the long run? Facilitate.
So kind of leading into that, you know, we've just been talking about communication, being able to communicate and connect, and working across boundaries. You know, I'm wondering about, we have so much modern technology, right? And so many avenues for communication, social media, things like that. Is there anything that we might be able to use, whether it's technology or communication tools, that might be able to kind of make this easier? How do we communicate more effectively? How do we get the word out? I don't know if the lack is education necessarily, but just kind of communicating engagement, getting people involved and interested and invested in understanding, you know, what is the benefit to them? Are there anything that we can do to improve that?
I think you gotta think about who we care about being engaged. And I think it's the decision makers. It's city councils, it's city leadership, it's watershed district boards, agency leadership. And that's, at least from this type of research and implementing it, they're the ones that decide, approve these expenditures. So I think we gotta get to a point where the term research for some folks is viewed as a waste of money because it's not directly, immediately resulting in phosphorus reduction. And I think we might do better to talk about things like pilot projects, which is research. And that's a more active statement. I think it's thinking about the words you use, especially when you're talking to folks that are making funding decisions. And I think more people like to be involved in a pilot project, something that's happening, something a watershed board member or council member can point to on the ground, doing something, or being innovative, versus holding up a research report and saying we did this. It's something on the ground. So that's something I thought about in terms of how to bring people along with the latest research. Try to call it a pilot project or something more active.
We'll take another audience question.
Jamie, I was really fascinated by your story about the underground sand filter. We are hearing increasing number of stories from cities that are opening up underground sand filters and underground infiltration vaults and finding them full of water all the time. But they're just anecdotes. At the same time, we're seeing increased regulatory pressure. Good example is volume control standards for road projects that we think are going to become drivers for a large number of these underground BMPs. Question is, what's the best way to go from a set of anecdotes to a solid set of data that is a legitimate driver for decision making?
I think it's a really good question because I don't underestimate the power of anecdote. In a field where you have little data, anecdote becomes fact and opinion drives decisions. So I don't underestimate the power of anecdote. That said, I think the way you move forward is, again, you need to develop these. So had we designed the subsurface sand filter with the operator in the room, he would have never let us do it. And he would have said, this is great. I'm glad your data shows that this can be effective, but how am I going to maintain it? And we would have been like, oh, it's easy. You just scrape the filter off. And then he would have said, look, guys, what do you mean scrape the filter off? And then we would have realized, oh yeah, they don't sell a subsurface sand filter scraper on Amazon. And so I'm not absolving myself from error in that. And I'm also advocating for more collaborative design, especially for municipal projects. That doesn't mean every project, but I was just communicating with a town, and I was very leery about a chamber system. I know they work. We've studied them for 2 years, and they work great. I also have reservations about maintenance. And I said, do you realize how these function? And they say, yes, we have a number of them, and we maintain them. I'm like, how do you do that? We hire these people, they hydrojet this out, we've done it, and that makes me feel better. I'm like, oh, you have a history. And then that, to me, that means they know what this is. This isn't just smoke and mirrors. You have experience, you know what it entails, and you're accepting that. And I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but I think it's designing with the owner in the room, or the owner-operator, and making sure they understand what it is we're doing. And if they don't, that's a big red flag in my head, because this stuff is not highly technical. It's storage, it's filtration. So, you know, I think that's really, for us as the design engineers, we really need to work on that part. And I don't know how many people are doing that, but I hope it's getting more and more. You're actually sitting down with the owner-operator.
Another question from the audience?
Again, I'm Uday Singh, and I work for Mississippi Watershed Management Organization. And as Randy was saying about the underground sand filters, the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization, in collaboration with the small city of San Antonio Village, and then Hennepin County and Minneapolis, we built a facility we are calling as a San Antonio Stormwater Treatment and Research Facility. And there, as you were talking about, is like having who are going to own and operate it is always on the table. However, in the initial phase of when the facility is built, it has a primary chamber, and then a secondary chambers are going to be owned and operated by us, you know. And our goal there is to do that research or to collect the data, and every day or weekly we are out there. So we have taken the ownership to help the city have their operation and maintenance. Like, we have this whole manual, but what it is like to be operating and maintaining it, and while also doing the water quality monitoring. So the intention again is that what you said, it makes sense, and we are a small organization. However, the project was a very expensive project, was $1.5 million project, but it has come to the fruit, and we will continue to have some information. And in fact, I'll be presenting some of the challenges which we have faced in just operating that facility for the last 2 years.
Any response or comments from the panelists on that?
That's another example of a great watershed organization that's going to take a risk and own something, and now they're in that ownership seat. So love it. Yeah, and when you got eyes on something for long term, you know, that's like having a speedometer, right? Or you know, something to watch, and you have continual stories generated from a project, and that's something that, you know, is a training ground. It's a great story for, you know, the next thing you want to do. So I think, you know, those type of, you know, deep connections down at the project design and invention level can be really powerful tools for an organization or for, you know, the community.
And there's tons of innovation. When every state stormwater manual has pre-treatment as a structural forebay, and that's it, you know there's tons of room for innovation, which is really exciting.
Sometimes when we give something named best management practice, I really have the hair on the back of my neck stand up, because I know that, you know, those were designed by someone who had no idea what it costs to own and maintain those things. And I've already done the math on it, and I can't see how it multiplies out over, you know, my watershed to get scale. So sometimes I feel like, you know, the day that we give it a credit and say, yep, this is what we do, you know, we've already lost the game, because we're willing to throw so much money at a problem, or you will pay a king's ransom due to you know, we want the transportation part of a project rather than the, you know, the compliance piece of the stormwater. We got to start thinking about these as systems at a watershed scale. I've got 2 other utilities that I maintain and care for. water utility, sanitary utility, those two utilities on a 16 square mile area have a current replacement cost of 138 million and 70 million. Stormwater isn't even in the ballpark right now. And the primary purpose for that thing, there's not a clear like public health, value behind it. It's only in the 40 to 50 million dollar range for that same 16 square miles. We got to start figuring out, who cares about it, why they care, and generally they care because public safety, flood protection, environmental health, and a little bit of sanitation and public health as well. But we gotta align the customer behind this thing if we want to get to the level that we have our other two utilities at.
But my guess is if you look at linear foot for linear foot of pipe, structure for structure, you have equitable investment in your stormwater system minus the energy inputs. Obviously, everything's passive.
Right.
But, linear foot for linear foot, you probably have just as much pipe in the ground. Structure for structure, probably have just as many structures. And your budget, like you said, is.
And we know it's underperforming and it's not as valued as the two other utilities. When I think about those utilities, I have the benefit of being able to treat just a little bit of the water every day, deliver it kind of consistently over 365 days. Stormwater systems sit empty, except for the last couple of years. Just waiting for the next storm, and you only get 17 days to do all your treatment. So it's a different challenge, and it's a tougher one because flood protection and clean water are competing for the same pool. Drainage services, people pay for drainage services. A wet basement will drive capital every day. Try to sell a rain garden to someone who has a wet basement. It's tough.
I had one comment, I guess, going in the past at Randy's question about getting a data set, and I didn't quite hear if I had a question at the end or if this is a sort of an example of doing that. But one of the things I was thinking was, one of the problems with underground systems is sometimes you can't see them or whatever, you're not out there when it's happening. But I mean, if people are out there and they're opening them up, maybe it's a researcher or a pilot or I think accelerated implementation of maintenance is, stimulating everybody to have a SharePoint where they could just submit their maintenance reports and take photos of their systems. And then all of a sudden you have all these systems that we don't always see, but if you could aggregate that, maybe that's how, and with the notes and photos of things and photos of different aspects, that would be a probably not very costly project, at least to request that kind of data, because if everybody wants to figure out what the heck they're doing with it, they would probably just contribute their information, and then all of a sudden, there you go.
Getting people or requiring people to share their failures, I mean, those are the best lessons, right? Let us all bring our failures to a failure summit one day and say, all right, how did you screw it up? How did you screw it up?
Because we know you did.
Yep.
Or you didn't look.
Those are learning opportunities. We're not inviting David.
And that's, actually that kind of is exactly what I was trying to get out of this. Jamie mentioned lack of research on operation and maintenance, examples of collecting data. Cap Region, other watershed districts, MWMO have data on operation and maintenance, collecting all of that, putting it together for the broader good of everybody to learn from. Maybe that fills that research gap. It doesn't have to be the university that does the research. It can be in the field. As Bob was saying, that's still learning, right? Lessons learned from that. Let's take one more question from the audience here.
Sure. I have a question of just how do we sell the value of the research? I'd say that other industries, like let's say solar panels, we've seen the curve of kilowatt hour per dollar go down. Sure, we're just going to go with that, and everybody knows what I mean. Is there a way that we can communicate the value of our research in a similar way so that we can, when the tax, people have to vote on it again, we can show that not only we're implementing and we're not just stuck in this, it's $100 per pound and that's the best we're ever going to get it. It's like, actually, it's $100 per pound now, and we're moving towards $50 a pound, and we're using less area, and we're opening up more parkland because we don't have to have as big of BMPs now because they're better. I mean, is that actively being done? It just seems like the research part is as important as implementation from the standpoint you want to make sure that you're making things better and cheaper and easier to maintain. Is that a portion of what we're doing?
I'll just jump on this because I've looked at economics and trying to find different ways to make that point and make that case. The problem I keep running into is the economics of our field are generated when there's a regulation. Outside of that, the economics of environmental services aren't really founded in anything, right? So the basis of our economic valuation is a cost avoidance from that's relative to some regulation or someone coming in and telling you to do something and what's it going to cost to do it versus a preemptive. You know, we always say prevention, an ounce of prevention is a pound of cure. But in stormwater, there's no valuation of what that is until the watershed is degraded and until some type of regulatory mechanism sort of solidifies those by putting a standard and putting a target criteria. And then all of a sudden, that's what makes the economic valuation. So that's what I always struggle with. Arguing from a cost avoidance perspective is tough because the assumption born in all of that is that someday somebody's going to come in and make you do it all. And then that's when you're going to pay the piper. Do it now, pay for it now, or pay for it later. But of course, that's an assumption. And it's hard to sell people on that EPA is going to drop out of helicopters and put you in environmental jail.
And it's not fun working on that side of the equation.
Yeah, it just, and everything starts to break down. And you're like, why are we doing this?
So I always like to say, Mother Nature is going to write the check if you don't. So, you know, and some people are fine with that because, you know, it's not a certainty that you're going to spend dollars later. I always say if one of these watershed districts or the PCA were to put out like a phosphorus bounty and say, we're willing to pay, you know, just give us as much phosphorus as you can go get. I would have quit my job a long time ago and gone out as a phosphorus bounty hunter and started just, you know, innovating technology and putting stuff in and, you know, running my fleet of street sweepers because, you know, there's really no profit motive in what we do. So in my work, I really try to tie into the value that residents and councils, you know, that they have for the environment. I really try to tie into the demand that I see them, and you know, we can manage for many multiple benefits, and that's, you know, the great thing about LID. But it's a really complicated sale, and it's a complicated sale with all sorts of other, you know, hangups around it. So you know, if we can start to, you know, change some of our governance structures to actually look for, you know, the values that we're looking for and pay for them, you know, and you know, untap people's creativity, I think that'd be great. But, you know, when you follow the line of the other two big utilities and their development, you know, they're regulatory push, you know, drivers. And, you know, we're always going to be just kind of, you know, slowly implementing over long periods of time. But that's infrastructure. You know, can we go a different direction? Is someone willing to try?
Guys, we'll just take two quick questions. There's one. Can you be quick, Randy, or should I come back to you?
I'll be quick.
So it's a phrase I haven't heard this morning yet, which is lessons learned. The value of research will be recognized when we use the techniques of information diffusion and technology transfer to translate them into lessons that can be applied by local implementers. We can collect stories of examples where those kinds of lessons have saved millions of dollars. Those stories are out there. We haven't collected them. There's the justification for the value that you're looking for.
And one more in the back here. You can comment or respond if you like.
I don't do this often, but I'll agree with you. I think the case studies are absolutely how you justify research. You show with this nominal investment in research, we came up with a better mousetrap. And if we wouldn't have, we would have spent all this extra money to get the same benefit.
But that's still cost avoidance. And so the best example I have for instant valuation is the city of New York. The city of New York worked out an agreement where they pull all their water, drinking water, from upstate New York in this beautiful, pristine area. And basically they were told they had an agreement with EPA that you don't have to build a treatment facility as long as you preserve the water quality in the uplands. That creates an instant market that's defined by the cost avoidance of building that facility. And it always comes back to that cost avoidance, because when we tell people, it's like, obviously, who here wants poor water quality? No one's gonna raise their hand. 1,000 people, 999.9 are gonna say, I like water quality, but when does that market actually get realized? It's when it all hits the fan. And when that happens, then you're doing this calculator, the back calculate, what should you have done? What could you have done? What's this gonna cost to clean up? And it doesn't really value the environmental services that we're really talking about. And I think that's because our economics aren't based on a resource economic scale. It's based on a more extractive, right? What's the cost of supplying the resource? And then when it's exhausted or everything's polluted, then it's more economic plus. When we have to clean it up, it's more stimulus. So I think we're just caught trying to rationalize something in an irrational system.
About costs. The focus on cost avoidance is reasonable for the perspective of a polluter who's like trying to avoid fines, as you point out. But I think we're really moving as a community away from that. Water resources management now, that topic is all about cost externalities, right? Somebody else pays for it. Well, guess what? The public is picking up those external costs to the corporation. Watershed districts in Minnesota and many other organizations, sometimes foundations such as the William Penn Foundation in the Delaware River Basin, which actually extends into the drinking waters of New York. So the organizations are saying, we want to clean up our waters, our public waters. So how do we do it most effectively? And that we need to have information about cost as part of that adaptive management. What is that we just got a grant from whoever, or for $500,000, how can we maximize how many pounds of phosphorus we remove? So this question about reducing the cost of removing a pound of phosphorus from the watershed is really actually on super solid ground from the perspective of people who are implementing conservation practices for the public to take care of the externalities that the polluters that you're describing externalized.
No comments on that, then we will begin to close. I'd like to give all of our panelists just a couple minutes to give us closing thoughts, recommendations. What can we take from all of this discussion forward to improve what we do tomorrow? So we'll start on this end with Bob, please.
I think being willing to take some risks is important, and having some courage to do that as an organization, and not being afraid to fail. But you got to fail in the right way. You got to fail small and not fail big. So it's managing the risk. And I think about a couple innovations, or they're not innovations anymore because they're so common practice. I think about adding iron filings to sand, and then the SAFL baffle, or adding a baffle to a management structure. Those, I think, for utility owners were very low risk. Sand filter isn't new. Say, well, we can do a nominal cost increase for iron. Even if it doesn't work, I'm not out a lot of money. The system still filters water, just not as well. The SAFL baffle in the manhole, low risk, low cost, not putting in a huge new facility. So I think that's a lesson I've kind of thought about. That got a lot of good projects out in the ground. We've got good projects that we're really confident in. And can those be tweaked slightly or moderately to optimize their performance? And those are going to be way, way, way easier to sell to the city engineer than some brand new box that's got mysterious cartridges. And it costs $500,000. So that's maybe a lesson I think we should think about.
Yeah, I kind of felt like what Bob was saying was, I was thinking that it happened, but it was better spoken. I was, I guess, thinking that as far as breaking down these barriers and overcoming challenges and doing this, I think creativity is a key, but I think creativity on what do we already have that we maybe as much as what new processes or how can we capitalize on the process. And communication, which I think is if we feel like communication is a barrier, we're not doing it, you know, the best way to make that change is, I guess, and just taking the initiative on a daily basis to do that, you know, look for new material. I was on a college tour with my kid in April, and not being an engineer, I never, one of the guidance people or missions folks at British Columbia mentioned scientists or whoever are, you know, developing these processes, and there's obviously like engineering research, but engineers scale up this stuff, you know, and so I think what Bob was saying was, yeah, how do we scale up? Whether we have this new technique, but you know, one part of that is not reinventing the wheel or not having a whole new wheel that just has, you know, different directions, maybe the one you've already got, you know, put some flaps on it or something. So I think that for scientists or people who are thinking about that too, maybe that's something, how do you use what you've got already, and that's sort of, you know, plays into Ross and having people go out with you to the field, but with that great communication and practicality could be incorporated at the research end and augment what we're doing with it.
My only closing thoughts are, you know, thanks to the university for putting this together, and our host here. You know, wherever you are in this field, you know, whether you're a scientist or a practitioner or a owner or decision maker, you know, get involved. You know, get down into the project level. You know, let's get together and figure out what some performance indicators that we all share and can report are. Get involved in the conversation, because it's you know, if you're working on the fun side of this equation, it's a really rewarding place to spend your time, and I think together we can put it together.
So I guess I would close by also thanking the university. And I would say the industry of the problem is fueled by this need for exact costs or optimized units of analysis of making the uncertain more certain. And I recognize that as very cyclical. We can always come up with a better way to model something. We can always model something a little bit different. You have people that make their whole careers on designing a new proprietary knob for a model that makes it a little bit more accurate. I think the industry of the solution, which is where I hope we start to move, embraces the uncertainty and understands that it is adaptive, that we're going to make mistakes. And not learning from our mistakes is the biggest mistake of all. Because even if we think we have it all figured out, implementation is going to shine new light on that process. It's going to lead to innovations. And I think we're kind of at that. I look at where we are in stormwater as we're kind of emerging out of the dark ages into the Renaissance. And I think you're going to see, once people do decide to implement, you're going to see lots of innovation, which is going to just blow up the toolbox that we have to approach some of these issues. And that's where I hope we're moving. And I appreciate everybody's time and commitment to that effort.
Very good. Well, I would like to thank the audience, both online and in person, for joining us today. If you can join me in thanking our panelists and our speaker.